Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ḻEMMA's first webinar for 2021. Today we will be looking at the pension system in Malta. Where should we be heading? It's a topic which is of interest to many, as witnessed by the number of questions that were also sent in by participants when registering. With me, I would like to start off by reminding you that this webinar will be recorded and will be uploaded onto the ḻEMMA website in a few days from today. So any of those who cannot stay till the end can watch it at their own leisure. And also, if you have any friends or colleagues who would wish to revisit this webinar, you may do so by visiting the ḻEMMA website. Today, our panel, we have a wide spectrum of perspectives through our panel. I start off by introducing Mr. Mark Mosu, who is the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry for Social Justice and Solidarity, the Family and Children's Rights. Rini Laivira, Commissioner for the National Commission for the Promotion of Equality. Abigail Mamo, who is now a regular fixture on our webinars, CEO of the Malta Chamber of SMEs. Nikos Kirkop, Press Officer for GEF, Young European Federalists. And Carmel Mallia from the National Association of Pensioners. And I am Mario Kassar. I will be moderating this webinar for the next hour and a half. So with that, I would like to introduce also David Spiteri-Gingell, who is the team leader of ḻEMMA. He will be presenting us with a short overview of the strategic review that has been carried out and published recently, which is the basis for this webinar. Where should we be heading in terms of pensions? How sustainable is our pension system? What additional measures can we take to make sure that future generations will be able to partake in these pensions? So with that, David, if you would like to start off and share the overview of the strategic review.
Okay, thank you very much. My pleasure to be here with you. Pension reform is perhaps one of the more difficult policy areas, and this is not only because pension overlaps with a significant number of other policy domains. Fiscal sustainability, fertility, health and longevity, fertility, immigrants, females and employment, and the whole hog. But it is also complex because it transcends generations, and one of the major difficulties in designing pension reform is really trying to find a balance between competing interests. The interests of youths are different from the interests of a current pensioner. The way a female is impacted is different than the way a male is impacted. So design is really a tapestry of different interests, and trying to seek adequate solutions for the well-being of each of those interests, whilst at the same time ensuring the system's sustainability. For at the end of the day, the adequacy element is really the twin side of the coin of sustainability. We can design the most beautiful pension system, as some countries have done, but we have also seen that when things do go wrong, the collapse can be catastrophic and pervasive, not just to current pensioners, but future pensioners as well. So this is no easy task, and best demonstrated by the fact that in a lot of advanced countries, a couple of months just last year, France, for example, when you start to try to find solutions to pensions, invariably you have demonstrations and social unrest. Now, the journey for reform in Malta started in 2004. There were attempts before, but they did not materialize. This time, there was no choice but to have a serious review. Why, you would ask? Because the government had received from the World Bank in March of 2004 a report that showed that the system had failed with regard to future pensioners. Whilst the system had shown that it can continue to provide what we call an average pension replacement rate, that's our jargon for adequacy, and we gauge adequacy by the relationship between average wage and average pension income. Whilst the study showed that the system would provide safeguards to current pensioners to a degree. I'm not saying to an acceptable degree. I'm saying to a degree. When it came to people who were going to start retiring in 2035 and beyond, the system could not provide them an adequate pension, where the average pension replacement rate, which in our system supposedly is 67%, these guys who are going to retire between 35 and 50, between 2035 and 2050, we're going to receive a pension that is worth 16%. So the system collapsed. Okay, this, how do you say, focused the minds. And the Prime Minister personally had set up a working group, which he maintained responsibility for until all the work was done, to come up with a solution. Now, there were various reforms. I'm not going to go into them. We don't have the time. But of the proposals that were finally submitted in 2005, government decided to take only two particular trusts: the parametric reforms to the state pension and the active employment reforms to strengthen the active base and hence the contributory base and hence the revenue to the system. One of the things that the government had done on the recommendation of the technical team was that one cannot allow something so important both to the financial well-being of the country as well as to individuals and the population per se, allow such a policy sector to be abandoned as it was between 1979 and 2004, 27 years, as fundamentals relating both to what underpins a pay-as-you-go system, as well as cultural and social dynamics, the way that was allowed to happen. And a trigger was introduced that mandates a government, be who it is, for every 5 years for a strategic review to be carried out. The intention was, the purpose of why a 5-year calendar was chosen, because it was felt that whilst changes will be required, a 5-year process allows us to maintain control of those changes, both in terms with regard to their performance as well as their impacts. And by doing so, by adopting an incremental approach, we have a better handle of avoiding social tensions. Now, the latest review is the 2020 review. What you see here in this graph is a situation of how the pension system will behave over the next 50 period. Now you will ask, 50 years is one hell of a projection time frame. It is, but when you come to pensions, you look at 50 years because that is the horizon of the journey of a person who enters the labor force at 18 years until he or she come to retire at 65 years. There are other countries in Europe who have a 67, 68, 69, so you have a 50-year period. Okay, this is how it is estimated that the system will behave in the event that nothing is done. Okay, we continue as is, that nothing is done. Now, what this shows is that that for quite a time to come, between 2020 to 2050, the system is in balance, is sustainable. Okay, and what that does is it gives the policymakers and the designers and the reform architects a degree of maneuverability in terms of what type of recommendations, what types of policy instruments can be introduced, etc. Come 2050, the system starts going into deficit. Now the deficit, as you can see, balances out, kind of shallows out around 2000, around 3%, a deficit of 3%. Now, we all know that, a deficit is always a deficit, and it's never a nice thing to have, because that means that you have to make up from that deficit from somewhere else. Nevertheless, a 3% deficit is a manageable deficit. I'm not saying it's a sustainable deficit. I'm saying it's a manageable deficit. And in part, there are two reasons why this deficit will start to materialize. The first is that around that time, around 2050, those persons who are on the reformed system, okay, they entered the system as it was fully reformed in 2007, what we call the switchers. We're going to have people who are starting to retire knowing only that system. And because of certain elements that are in place to allow for a relationship of the pension income with wages, that has a fiscal impact. The second is liabilities. The pension will owe and will have to start to pay liabilities to third country nationals, should they qualify for them, because they would have paid their contribution here should they qualify for a pension, and EU citizens. So this is the journey where we started. Okay, in 2004, we were facing the catastrophic position that by 2050, the system will collapse and still run a deficit of 4%. Okay. The various reviews, the various reforms, the 5-year reviews have incrementally improved the state of play. So as you can see, both at the adequacy level, there has been an incremental increase, and both at the pension deficit, there has been an incremental decrease of the pension. So the indicators are that things have improved for the better. Now this is the $6 billion question. Things have improved for the better. Should we rest here? Is this the time to call, okay, guys, the reform is over? We don't believe that. We don't agree with that, because pensions is always evolving. Okay, as I said, it is impacted by multiple factors and by different generations and all of that stuff. So there is always significant, and I emphasize significant, room for tuning and improving. Basically, we have identified 5 major principles. The first is that the pension system is not a poverty instrument. It is not a poverty instrument. The pension system is a social contract between the government and each of us, because we do not have a choice on paying on not paying our contribution. Other countries do, for example, Chile, okay? But in our regard, this is a social contract, and the social contract does not place you in poverty. A social contract is there to make sure you do not fall into poverty. But yes, there will be situations, there will be people who have worked less, there will be people who may be impacted, and poverty measures should be considered, but outside of the system. Second, so I'm just mentioning the highlights. The presentation will be made available. Second, we need a very strong employment base. Just to let you know where we started off in 2004. Female employment in the labor market was 30%. Retirees over 61 who were in employment were literally hundreds. The exit through the what do you call it, our invalidity pension was quasi over 10,000. And what have we seen over this process? We have seen measures introduced which have had positive impacts, in certain cases phenomenal impacts, when particularly, for example, when we talk about female unemployment. Today, female unemployment, it's over 60%. And if you look at the 35-year and under, Malta's performance is above the EU average. Now, you know, that took place in 16 years. That is short of miraculous. Our system is designed to give you a basic income in retirement. When it was, there were, you know, I'm not going into the technicalities. There are reasons that have led to this. It was not originally designed this way. It was originally designed to provide a 67% relationship with the highest wage in government. Okay, that was the way it was designed. But unfortunately, 30 years of relinquishing that relationship has led the system to be something else. We are not like other countries where you pay a high contribution, 25%, on your full income. Okay, and then the replacement rate goes into the 80%. We don't have that model. We have a model that has a cap. You pay 10% on that cap. You pay that 10% only on basic wage, and it gives you what you pay for. So what we are saying is that if you want to have a quality of life when you come to retire that equals or bridges that the life you enjoyed whilst you were in employment, then there is a degree of self-responsibilization. And it is the government's moral obligation to provide measures, provide regulation, provide incentives to get you to start planning, okay, for your future. I mentioned the tensions within the system, okay, and the key tension here is between current pensioners and future pensioners, and it will always remain. And as we move towards to future pensioners, okay, the onus, potentially the rigor of the pension system on future pensioners is likely to increase. Okay, this has happened already when we compare people who were on the old system. For example, they only had the contributory requirement of 30 years and they could exit and retire at 61. People who switched to the new system have a contributory requirement of 40 years. That's an additional 10 years, and have to retire at 65. So as you move forward, okay, the system will become more onerous on future generations. And finally, the system must be flexible. Circumstances change, behavior changes, society changes. Malta's society is changing as we live it. We have a large number of migrants. We have a large number of people married to migrants. One of them is myself. and the system must be flexible, so that we manage these societal changes, because if we do manage them in time, then we can handle it smoothly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Interesting overview of how the pension system has been evolving over time. And the first, you pointed out to this, but will we ever see the end of pension reform? What do you think, Mark, from your perspective in terms of policy?
As David has clearly stated in his presentation, while the system is currently in a positive balance, and it is expected that it should remain so to at least 2050, with no change from the current regime, the system would go into deficit from 2050 onwards. So that to me is a clear indication that pension reform is ongoing. That is also why the fifth principle, which David mentioned, and the last of the basic principles on which we are basing currently our pension reform, is for the system to always remain flexible. For instance, one clear example of this was clearly made in these last few weeks, where we have just legislated so that due to the COVID situation and the fact that a lot of workers have lost on their income, particularly self-employed persons who have had a reduction in their income, especially those operating in the affected sectors, as well as other employed workers who also work in the affected sectors and might have had reductions in their income, basically having to live on the wage supplements which were provided by government. In that situation, for those persons who would be retiring in the next 3 years, if year 2020 would normally be factored in the calculation of their pensionable income, we have just legislated in the sense that for employed persons, if their income was reduced in 2020, we will consider their salaries earned in January and February as their salaries earned throughout the whole year. We would consider them as earned throughout the whole year. So we'll annualize their 2020 income on the salaries earned in January and February 2020. Whereas for self-employed persons, we will consider their 2020 income in the eventuality that their income has decreased as being equivalent to that earned in 2019. So in that respect, we will guarantee that these persons will not be affected for the rest of their lives, basically, because the pension they get is for their lifetime due to the COVID situation. And this is, for me, a clear example of what we mean by saying that the system should always remain flexible and adapt to changes. David obviously mentioned the case, for instance, of persons, especially women, who would be undergoing separation or divorce proceedings. As we know, traditionally, we come from a culture, although it is being gradually changing over years, we come from a situation where women tend, or families tend to agree, the husband and wife tend to agree that the husband goes to work and the wife stays at home. That is also one of the reasons why today we have thousands of married couples which live on one retirement pension. Because obviously in the past it used to be like that women used to stay at home and men used to go to work. So these are the type of situations that the system has to address. On the other hand, then, for me, the first principle is the most important. To me, and obviously to the whole of the pension strategy group, the pension system, our pension system, should not be the only source of income for persons in their retirement. And number two, should not be the vehicle through which poverty is addressed. Okay, the system is there. Obviously, it will help to alleviate poverty, but in my understanding, poverty should be addressed through other vehicles and through other systems and sources.
Thank you, Mark. Rini, Mark and David both made reference to the fact that there is a much more significant female participation in the workplace today, doubling of female participation over a period of 15 years. How do you see this from the perspective of equality, and in this instance between males and females? What else, in your opinion, needs to be done to achieve real equality if there are still gaps in equality? You need to unmute, Rini. Rini, you need to unmute. Rini, you need to unmute. Rini.
I was trying to use the space bar.
I misled you.
No, maybe my laptop. Thank you for that question. It is at all order to reply to, but I will try. Well, the Permanent Secretary mentioned the traditional mentality in Maltese society regarding the economic man, and with the husband out at work and the wife stay at home. Well, this has been changing for a number of years, especially in the last years. It has been changing, yes, and we've seen the result. We've seen the result of the contributions that have been increasing all the time, and also the independence of these women in not just in the present, but also in the future, because we know that there is a pension gap, significant, very significant, the highest being Malta, not only on the issue of eligibility to a pension, but also on the quantity, on how much you get as pension. So there is there are considerable gaps there that need to be addressed. I must say this because it's been worrying me since the first time I had a discussion with David. When I looked at the strategic committee or work party, I realized that no woman was on this group of people. You may say, look, but we've raised issues about women, yes, but you haven't included the woman's perspective. These are all males. With due respect, today I'm very glad that there's Abigail and that there's me. At least there are two of us. So there is this perspective. But I think we should review nowadays, in this day and age, when we know that women are the most that are being hit and are going to be hit with pension reform. Having said that, what we have to look at is how we're going to address this mentality. We have been working. We know that we have just had a study undertaken, online study, to see how the situation has developed during the pandemic with the work-life balance situations, and we've seen that there is an increase of 16% of more women declaring that the number of hours have increased considerably due to care responsibilities. Now, there was already a gap of 28%. Now there's a further gap of 16%. Now, this may mean that women, in fact, we know from the survey that women have lessened the number of hours at work, and some of them have stopped temporarily, not left, but asked for leave during the pandemic. This does not occur well, because it may mean that in the long term, women may decide, listen, I'm better off not working outside the house, and it will be there. So we need to address...
If I may interrupt you, Rini,
yes.
Would this not be addressed by what Mark just mentioned in terms of the measures introduced in new legislation to address the difference in earnings because of COVID?
Not really, because this is not about the difference in earnings. This is about how you have a work-life balance, how you're going to cope at home and at work. This is what this is all about. And we're moving to more remote working, which would mean that the increased hours women are taking on to care for the family are there, and they're going to remain there. And if that is happening, whilst on the one hand, it is good that you make up for the hours of traveling and what have you, at the same time, you have another issue. So there we have to look at the issues. And for example, we haven't seen one interesting point that needs to come up, besides addressing this traditional behavior that we have, and we have to work with men, fathers, for them to understand the importance of their role in the family. Very important. We need also to see how to increase the fertility rate, because that should help also in the long term. We always advocated for childcare services because we were looking at the Scandinavian countries, and we were saying, look, Scandinavian countries, the fertility rate is high, much higher than ours. It's highest in the EU, but they have their participation in the workforce is very high. So we were thinking, listen, this may help us also with regard to women participating in the labor market. So there we have to see what is happening, why. We need studies, we need research. Why aren't women? We have women also who are of a certain age, and although the number of women above 45 are increasing, they are not increasing enough. Now, issues so we need to work on that as well, and to see why. There is also the issue of Principle 4, which is for me discriminatory. It is discriminatory. Principle 4 talks about fair balance between contributions and benefits. Now, we know that when you have a one-earner couple, the surviving spouse inherits the pension of the deceased. When you have two working, both of them working, so they've been paying 2 NI contributions, this does not happen. So I question that principle with regard to fair balance between contributions and benefits. So if I'm paying 100 euros per week or whatever per year, I get to inherit my spouse's pension. If I'm getting 200 euros, we're paying this is now. This means this sounds as if, look, why are you looking for after people who already have a pension? Well, it is much more than that, because I've known people, and there are not many women at my age or retirement age at the moment who have their own pension, because at the time, even more than today, the tradition was that you don't continue working. That their standard of living has dropped drastically, because first you're used to all your life to 2 income, suddenly 1 income over and above the loss of your spouse. So there, the effect the effect that it is having on the well-being of, and usually men and women, but mostly women, because women tend to live longer, which means not only the drop in their social life, in their economic life, but also in the fact that they are getting older and they live longer, so they become more dependent on other people, on other services in their life. So this I think would need very much to be addressed. We also have to look at the pre-62 pensioners, the current and the pre-62 especially, because there's no formula that there is, and the capping of the pension, because there is, as far as I know, with the other groups, there are particular formulas which raise the capping. With that group, there is no formula, so you're getting, so the value, it is good that at the lower end, the pensions of that group are increasing. But it is also meaning that the concertina is closing. And when you were thinking that you were planning for a good income in your retirement, the value of your pension is decreasing. These are issues that I think would need very much to be addressed. We've also said that we don't agree with the mandatory retirement age. I think at this point in time, that needs to be addressed. People need, because it depends on, first of all, on your state of health, on the work you're doing. So if you're feeling okay, why shouldn't you continue, especially for public officers? Because Abigail may shed light on this one, with family business, it is much easier, and many of our companies in Malta are family business, it's much easier to continue. But with public service, for example, the public sector, at 61, most of us are being asked to retire. So this is very important. With regard to pensioner, well, I agree with regard to the voluntary occupational and the second pillar. I think Gemma is doing a lot of work with raising awareness on these issues. And I think we need to continue, especially with young people, because it is very difficult to get young people. And I'm glad there is Nikos Kirkhope, who will contribute. Very difficult to get young people to discuss their pensions. They think this is too far away, and they have a lot already on their plate, and they don't want to think about it or to plan for it. So I augur that Gemma will continue doing this work, very valid work, and to see how we can move forward. It is not an easy task, and I congratulate them for the work they've done so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rini. You mentioned you towards the end you started addressing the issue of those born before 1962. We have Carmelo here with us to give us that perspective.
Yes.
How do you look at it, Carmelo? You need to unmute, Carmelo.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I have quite a lot to answer, but first of all, I have to refer to it's very important, to the sustainability of pension. About the sustainability, a lot has been done already. In fact, in the 2019 report about the income and expenditure of the department, about the benefits, there was a surplus of 270 million. Now, but as regard, it's an ongoing procedure about enforcement. There is a need, and I think it's a bit of innovation that we have to collect more, because out there are millions to be collected from contributions. And if the necessary human resources will be given to the department, where the department can work from his various area offices. We have 2 inspectors at each area office, and these inspectors will go out in their particular areas to first educate the people about the importance of paying the contributions so that so that they can have short-term benefits and finally long-term benefits when they retire. So if we have these enforcement, at least we start with one in our district and go outside, go in the business and asking whether they are paying the right contributions, whether they are failing from paying the contributions, to note also the trend that is going on and is losing money to the department is that a lot of people enjoyed with the employers as workers are asked to pay a self-employed contribution instead of a class 1 contribution. This means that is less income to the department. And so there is problem about the sustainability. If we start doing these things, and then finally, yearly, we used to do it before when having got computers and everything was done manually. It is important that at the end of each year, the department will send a reminder in the form of a deficiency notice, but it is a form to inform them that their contribution is not being paid and they have to pay it. And that is areas where we can collect more money from the insured person outside, because a lot of money is going down the drain. Now, it's another point is about what Mr. Spiteri David Spiteri said. I agree totally with him about the social contract between the insured person and the department. So this social contract, I think, should apply in the case what happened with the reform, where now we have 2 categories of pensioners. And in our opinion, it was very unfair to put the current pensioners not in the same basket with others, because we had a social contract. We honored the contract. And then there is that particular change about the national minimum, about the reassessment of pension, about the maximum pensionable income, which should not have been done because it was not the fault of the current pensioner not to pay the proper contributions. And it should have been done better, in my opinion, if the system was a part of those who are entering first into the system, because they know about the conditions beforehand. We had no choice but to pay what the Act told us to pay, and we did our duty. And now the goalposts have been changed to the detriment of current pensioners. That's one of the reasons that it's very difficult, but you have to understand that will make a great difference, especially about the maximum pensionable income, where there will be a difference of 72 euros per week between a person and another, just for being have birth one day after another. It's 72 euros per week difference. I want to say something also about the gender gap, which Mrs. Lavira mentioned. It has to be noted now that with the change in the system, about we have to change from the average contribution. First, it was done on 2 averages. Now it has been changed to an average. This system is good for sustainability, but we should tell and educate the persons that now with 30 years, we used to have a full rate of pension. Now, under the new system, with 30 years, the proportion of the third system will fall by 22%. And this will have an effect on those persons who will not work for 41 years. And the reform was based on a system where everybody paid the full rate of contribution. And that assumption was not good, because in the circumstances, it will continue to be that there are persons out there who cannot do 41 years paying contributions, and these will have this proportion will have a drastic effect on their income on retirement. Well, I think I had a lot more, but I want to give chance to others.
Thank you, Carmel. I'm sure you can go on and on about.
No, this may be this one song for me.
But
yes.
You know, having your perspective, I would like to go to Nikos now. You know, Rini already made mention about how are we going to get the younger generations to start thinking and planning about the future. How do you see it from your perspective? It's been a long time before, you know, well, Abigail is still young, but the rest of us have a few miles under the bonnet, so we may not recall exactly our thinking at the time. How do you see this issue of pensions as you know, a young person looking forward to their careers and life?
Yeah. Good morning, first of all. Well, as a young person, I can't speak for all young people, but I can give you my perspective. First of all, there's this idea that's been toyed around in the panel about there being a conflict between youths and the elderly. Now, I would sort of like to debunk that myth, because ultimately, while I might not see it now, and young people might not see it now, we're going to be pensioners too. And in the meantime, who are pensioners? Our grandparents are pensioners, our parents are pensioners. I don't see a conflict in it.
Mm-hmm.
I subscribe to the sentiment, it being a social contract, the idea, the pension system. And on the idea of a social contract, I think that we shouldn't abandon the idea that the pension system is a social contract. As a youth, I'm speaking, I would like to see a pension system that, first of all, well, let's start here, really. Ceteris paribus, what is the aim of a pension system? I think that the aim of a pension system is a way that the state exercises its moral obligation in order to ensure that everyone over a certain age, when they can no longer work, can live a dignified life. Now, I think that some way or some form, now we're talking about the pension system, or if it should be tackled by another system, irrelevant, as in we have to talk about the idea of how do we make sure that people over a certain age who can no longer work, and as Ms. Lavera pointed out, that might not necessarily be the pensionable age, it should be flexible. How we're going to ensure the state, somehow or another, is going to ensure a dignified life, a dignified standard. And this is not just me saying, in the World Economic Forum says it in their white paper in 2017, when they recommend, number one, that the pension must provide the safety net pension for all and not just for some. And secondly to that, and thirdly, there are two other points. Improve ease of access to well-managed, cost-effective retirement plans and support initiatives to increase contribution rates. So as a young person, I want to have that security. I want to see a pension system that is bulletproof, to know that when I retire, I don't have a cliff edge. Now, the idea is, okay, we have these projections where the pension system is doing all right, really, until 2050. Now, the reality is, if I were to retire, I would retire way beyond 2050. So that affects me. So that's something that policymakers really need to consider now, as in to make sure that there's security. Because when do I need to start paying if there's a private pension scheme? Now, as soon as I enter the workforce, not in 50 years' time. Unfortunately, there's a situation of many people who are today in their 40s, 50s, and 40s and 50s especially, who are entering a system of pensions which has been reformed, and they didn't have the time when they were young. They didn't have the time when they were young to actually prepare for it, and they're stuck in this system which has been reformed in a way which is unfair in the middle of this, where they were expecting a 2/3 agreement, and now they're in an agreement where the pensions don't even cover, are hardly equivalent to a living wage. So what is the point of what I'm saying, really? The pension system has to be robust and strong in a way that ensures a dignified life for all. Because if we don't the fundamental thing in the society. If we don't ensure a dignified life for all, then what is the aim of government? That's the aim of government, to ensure a dignified life. And that's not just me saying it, everyone is saying it. And as a youth, I wish to see that I myself, but also the society in general, has this right, especially considering the flexibility of the workforce and all of the changes. A projection at the end of the day is just a projection. We need to think outside the box. For example, this idea of NI being the sole way of possibly funding pensions. I think we have to challenge that as well, because what is the aim in this society? Is it the aim to balance books within certain schemes, or is the aim to ensure on a global level that we've got absolute coverage within the welfare system as a whole? So this all needs to be an integrated approach between the welfare system, the economic system. So robust economic policy, as this is making, as the report here is citing very well with employment policy, but broadly, it's all interconnected. Robust economic policy to ensure economic growth, boost fertility rates. It's all really wanting in creating an agenda, a social democratic agenda, where there's social justice. Everyone works realistically. We cannot demerit, as Ms. Lavera noted as well, about unpaid work on the carer. That is something which needs to be rectified in general, and the system really needs to think outside the box, I feel, to make it robust. And just one last point that's very important. The pension system, of course, we can see that people would like and wish to live more than just that basic rate. People that are earning higher wages, and there should be more education, a lot more financial literacy, in order to understand the different options available, from ideas such as the American style 401k, for example. But besides financial literacy, which is very essential, for example, to give you guys an idea, I have never heard of JAMA before. I'm 20. I've never heard of the organization. So I feel like there is a lack. There is definitely a lack, because before I was asked for this panel, I never heard, and I had to do a lot of reading up about pensions, because I knew very little about how the system worked, to be brutally honest. So financial literacy, and secondly, security in the private sector. If we are pushing on this, and this report is clearly pushing VORPs, private pensions, there needs to be bulletproof security, because what's the point of paying into the system for years upon years only for the firm to collapse? So there needs to be more rigorous security, and if there is more information about the security, so people actually trust the system and not just create a situation which is ultimately unsustainable, where people, in order to make up their pensions, the classic idea in Malta seems to be to rent property and then rent out that property. Okay, it's novel, but it's not. I don't see it as sustainable, because if we want an economy which is based mostly on home buying, then this runs counter to that. So we can't have everyone renting out houses, because then you're creating a generation of people who can't buy houses because you've inflated the housing market, and we're caught out. So as much as we need to take care of people who are older, the elderly and people who are older need to take care of us, and policymakers need to take care of everyone. I want to be able, just as much as I want to be able to see my grandparents enjoy their pension and their life, I want to be able to have a robust pension, and I want to be able to at some point be on the property ladder. That's all my contribution, and thank you all.
Thank you, Nikos. Very interesting points. And I think, we all agree that what, the end objective should be of any pension system is to allow people who have contributed their lives working to be able to enjoy their golden years in dignity and enjoying a quality of life that is, something that they can be happy about. And this is what we are trying to achieve. We're trying to find ways where we can understand how to put in place certain reforms to be able to do this. Whether we are going to end up, because we talk in terms of percentages and this and that, but at the end of the day, what you've got in your hand is basically what you're going to be living with from a day-to-day basis. So sustainability is certainly a key factor And sustainability is basically, impacted by our economic performance, our economic activity, the type of economic activity, I would say, whether it is adding value, besides the structure of what we contribute to the pensions. Abigail, you represent a lot of businesses who are family businesses, small businesses, self-employed. How do people look forward to the time they either hand over their business to the next generation? Is it an issue, the pensions for business? Because some people might think, oh, they're businessmen, they don't need a pension in reality. What is the reality out there?
Thank you, Mario, for the question, and thank you, Gemma, for organizing and including me once again in this very interesting discussion. Our relationship with Gemma as an organization has started years back, many years back, I would say now. And we appreciate also that Gemma does not stop only at consulting us and raising a certain degree of awareness, but David specifically has pushed very, very, very strongly. He has pushed us to understand the vulnerabilities that the people that we represent as well face. Because as you rightly say, Mario, sometimes we see businesses as certainly not vulnerable. We see them as invincible almost, which is not the case. In the same way that each and every one of us on reaching pension age will need to rest and will not be able to work as much as we did in our youth or in our young stages of life, it is also true for businesses. And something that Rini mentioned, which is very relevant, is that when self-employed, when family businesses reach pensionable age, it is easier for them to continue working. But then there is another stumbling block, because it works the other way around. The people that continue on working don't let their business go. So then there is a bit of a problem, because they do not give their business over to the next generation, and the business ends up sometimes even closing with some catastrophic effects, because there was no proper handover of the business. So unfortunately, that also has a bit of a big question mark of what happens then to the original owners, and the business fails at that stage, and they have to rely only on their pension. But going a bit back to your question before highlighting certain things that came out of the discussion, Mario, unfortunately, the reality is we will all be going through this process, God willing, obviously, and we will be lucky to reach that age. But it is not something that anyone looks forward to thinking about. So we have a very good way of putting this under the carpet and trying to postpone taking certain decisions. And it's difficult sitting around the family table and discussing what will happen when you reach pension age and how you start preparing, sort of, you keep on postponing that kind of discussion. And that is very true for businesses. Businesses especially think that they will keep on working forever. So that does not help, obviously, when you are planning. Some things that I wanted to point out is that, firstly, when David presented this presentation to us, something that I wanted to point out then, I did in fact with David, but I think it's very relevant as well in this discussion. Unlike what we are used to, what David presented today is quite a positive picture when it comes to pensions, because usually when it comes to pensions, it's all doom and gloom, and we're saying we don't know when and how we will get there, when looking 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line. So the figures are quite encouraging. The deficit, of course, is not something that we should aim for, and we should continue working to improve on the situation, as David and even Mark Mousou said. But I think it's quite positive, the numbers that we are seeing. My concern is can we rely fully on these numbers? And that is where I think we need to revisit maybe a little bit and see how realistic that scenario is. So during 2018, 1/3 of contributors were foreigners. 2018 was a year when the economy was booming at a level that we hadn't seen in many, many, many years. It was extraordinary. And that is why we had many, many foreigners. Now, obviously, 2019 already had started slowing down in terms of economic performance. And with a bit of a slowdown, businesses don't continue to grow at the same pace, they don't continue to employ at the same pace, and this not considering the dramatic effects of COVID, which obviously has sent our economy crashing down. So the projections that by 2070, Malta will have a 700,000 population, which will be contributing to our pension, is, I think, ambitious, overly ambitious, but also a bit impossible for us to achieve. Knowing, as you all know, Malta's sort of handicaps when it comes to how our population can grow, how far our population can grow, it is very difficult for us to imagine how we will grow by another 200,000 in terms of population. So that is very important if we are going to project where we are going to be in 2050 and where we are going to be in 2070. Equally important, I think, and something that a lot of valid work has started on, but more needs to be done when it comes to pensions, the idea of pensions being complementary to other things that an individual would take, to other measures, not being a standalone system. So if we are going to embrace that even more, embrace that policy even more, that pensions are complementary, we have in the recent budget, I think, seen the strengthening of a number of measures to attract people towards not relying just on the government's pension, but going into private pension systems. And from my experience, the incentive is the strongest driver towards changing people's choices. But here we are talking about a very big change in mindset, something that people don't look forward to thinking about. And probably a little bit more needs to be done at that level in order to push people to start thinking and making use of these incentives. So my invitation would be to the ministry and also to ÇEMMA to devise systems of how we can act as a bigger voice to bring people closer to this reality and start driving more the concept of the pension, the state pension being something complementary rather than a standalone system. Finally, I want to point out something that Rini mentioned related to childcare centers, which is something that has worked wonderfully in Malta. It has made all the difference. A bit of a concern I have at the moment is that COVID has affected us as females, especially, to a great degree. And we have already seen a bit of talk from the government side on whether the system related to childcare centers is sustainable, whether we want to keep it there. I believe that we should not only keep childcare centers, but give reassurance that childcare centers will be kept and extend the very good service that childcare center gives. It's very important if we want women to stay in the labor market and we want women to enter in more numbers in the labor market, we must keep childcare centers, but also extend the service that is offered. From our point of view, when it comes to self-employed owners, being female, they tell us one of the biggest difficulties is when the child moves from the childcare center to the school, and obviously there are very strict timeframes that these female business owners need to comply with. So the services at the moment that are available that sustain women in employment need to be extended, not retracted. Even though COVID happened, we should not go back on the very good progress we achieved in terms of females in the labor market, and we should be a bit patient and stick to the strategy and strengthen it.
Thank you, Abigail. And I think, you know, what's coming through is that when one is talking about the future of the pension system, it's like a huge jigsaw, or rather one of those baby mobiles that you place over their backpans to keep them occupied, and you push one part and all of a sudden all the other parts starts to move. And this, I think, is the reality. And again, we come down to certain principles. Should the pension be directly related to the level of contribution made? In which case, should there be an open-ended, tiers of different tiers of contributions beyond the current maximum, so that people who are on the higher brackets could eventually earn more in the future? Again, I think one of the basic principles, and I'll bring Nikos into this, is the fact that at the end of the day, what we're talking about is foregoing present consumption to guarantee, in a way, to secure better income in the future. Because I think one of the principles that has come across is that, or the realities, is that the government pension is not enough now, but still more going to be enough in the future to guarantee the quality of life that people are getting used to. And it needs to be supplemented. So that obviously means that we have to forego present consumption, put it in some kind of investment, a VORPS, a private pension scheme, or so on and so on and so on. So instead of taking 1-2 holiday breaks a year, you end up going away once every 2 years, every 3 years. It becomes a question of mindset. So my question, Nikos, to you as a young person is, how can this be made, communicated to young people, to help them realize the need to forego consumption today to secure a better future? What are the triggers that would make you, for example, start to save more?
Well,
I'm not saying that you don't save, huh?
Well, I guess the first thing you need to see in a situation like this is that even if the programs exist, and I believe that the programs right now aren't even sufficient to start with, but let's leave that. Even just getting people on board. The idea is I think there needs to be a much broader, as I said, financial literacy campaign. You need to be able to go into schools. It needs to become normalized into schools, social media, the whole marketing treatment. The idea of saving for tomorrow. This is something, of course, that it's very difficult to do. It's quite a task. It's quite an arduous task to think about 50 years' time, when very often young people in this dynamic economy aren't even thinking about next year to an extent. But yes, it's very important. The best way that I can possibly think of is the idea that it has to become, there needs to be some sort of initial push. So for example, once you enter the workplace, there needs to be the option provided by the workplace, perhaps, to sign up to these pension schemes, maybe not, while not forced as national insurances, but for example, they can tick a box whether they want contributions once they start, whether they want to pay contribution. And it becomes a normalized thing where once you enter the workforce, if you're especially first time, you have to have that discussion, and your employer has to, for example, is legislated to tell you about the options available, which is something which I believe is not enforced by law right now.
Actually, this is an interesting point, Nikos, because I believe in some countries, and David can explain perhaps a bit further if I'm off track here. But in some countries, it's actually you have to opt out rather than opt in certain pensions, which comes about by legislation. And this is also based on behavioral heuristics, in the sense that it makes you need a bigger effort, a bigger push to opt into something than to opt out. But this requires obviously legislation. Mark, from your vantage point, how do you see such initiatives? What would need to be in place to have such initiatives as these?
Obviously, Mario, incentives, as also Abigail has stated, are very important in this regard, because when it comes to providing for others, and let us be frank and blunt about this. Employers obviously have their own personal interests as well. And so one could understand that perhaps some employers would feel that they just abide with the normal national social obligations which are imposed, and that's it. So I believe that incentives are very important, and I do believe that quite a number of employers in the right environment would be willing to provide for the future pension or the future income in retirement of their employees, because I know employers who do reward their employees. So in that respect, that could be the way forward. As a group, we believe that having a system where there would be a mandatory opt-in and a voluntary opt-out, so that on enrollment, on getting employed, employees will be mandatorily opted in a second pillar pension or a private pension plan. And obviously then, if they want, they can opt out of it. We saw, and David can speak better than me about this, we saw that in other countries, it has worked and it has given results, because the tendency is that if someone is made to enter into a system, the tendency is that he is then reluctant to go out of it. So he will say, let me give it some time, let me try it out, and if I see that it's working out, I will remain there. And the tendency is that they will remain there. But
this is very true, because it doesn't happen on a regulated scale here in Malta. But from personal experience, I recall that when my son, for example, went to the bank for a loan, they convinced him to take out a small savings plan that would accrue over time. And at least it brought in the idea that you needed to put away some money for the future. Mm-hmm. And this, I think, also ties into what Nikos was saying in terms of education about financial capability. For example, in the States, a lot of companies run financial capability education programs, self-learn programs, and deliver financial coaching to help them plan about their future. And the idea here is very simple. Financial issues.
I've lost connection. I don't know if you're there.
Actually, we've lost Mario.
That's it. Yeah.
You want to get a personal private pension? Or a dog?
David, probably he will need some time to exit and
reconnect.
So yes, he just exited.
If I may just bring one point while we're here, just to emphasize the fact of how frivolous it is, in fact, to talk about pensions and this entire thing of marketing if we don't really ensure that the options available are bulletproof and secure. So there are two sides to the coin.
Yes, that is a very valid point, Nikos, and I agree with you about that.
Because it's not because to just push people into going into pensions that then are insecure. It's basically the failure of the policymaker. So the policymaker needs to see of the coin.
The way a number of systems are designed, the way a number of such enrollment systems are designed, they are very sensitive to the issue that you have raised.
Mario is back in.
Because literature shows and research shows very clearly that if you force a person of a certain income into a private pension, you are doing that person more harm than good, because you're going to force him into a position of having to meet a monthly payment, and people on the lower side of income not always have a steady income. So what systems do is that they in agreement with consultation, but in the design they would establish a threshold that would say, listen, only people with this certain threshold will be enrolled in. And excludes anybody else. Now, it can be that a person may want to voluntarily come in. Then that would be his choice, and that is where ḻEMMA and other stakeholders have an important role to play to make sure that if a person goes for that choice, he does so in a very informed way and knows what potential consequences can be.
Thank you, David. Apologies about that, but my internet service provider decided to kick me out, and I didn't switch immediately to the other service provider that I use as backup. So my apologies for that. We're coming up to the time. This is, I think we can go on for a couple of more hours discussing here, but we're coming up to the close of the session. So I would like to put to you the same question. If there was one thing that you think was absolutely crucial and important that we do to the pension system in Malta, what would that be? Rini, let me start with you. What would that be?
I think definitely we have to be fair to contributors. That is very important. We have to keep the social contract, but we also have to look at the vulnerable groups. I think this is where we have to focus. Because we know that in our society, and even though I keep mentioning women, but unfortunately, yes, statistics show, research shows that women in all sectors of society, maybe not in all, but in many sectors of society, are how shall I put it politely, are in a worse position. And with regards to pensions, they definitely are, and they definitely are. Also because of societal pressures on them, particularly in the past, when it was unheard of. I mean, when I continued working, even my mother decided that I was insulting my husband. I mean, that was the mentality. So it was the norm for them. So we can't say, listen, and not only that, the structures discouraged you. Finding a job was challenging. I mean, you had to resign from the public service, then you had to go into the private sector, which was even more difficult at the time because jobs were scarce, not as today. The mentality was against you. Childcare didn't exist, maternity leave didn't exist, but nothing existed. So the system worked against you. So we have to understand why these women are in the situation that they are, and they are so dependent. So yes, we need to look at being just with everybody and also with the vulnerable.
Thank you, Rini. Carmelo,
Yes.
what's the one thing you would change about?
As I told you before, I represent current pensioners. And so the first thing that I wish to happen is to deal with those 25,000 pensioners who are at risk of poverty. That's important for us. The second is that we need to have a safety net, just like we had in 1979. It's the safety net, because in my opinion, we have the maximum pensionable income known, whether you agree with it or not. But then you haven't got a benchmark how our minimum income through minimum pension is going to happen. And this is very important to low income earners, because as things are, prices, everybody knows, are going at a fast rate, more than wages and more than pensions. So the problem of poverty is with us and will continue with us unless we do a base where we guarantee that existing pensioners first, because we cannot do anything now. It's our life stopped. We cannot go into the private pension scheme. We cannot go anywhere. So it's important to address the problem of poverty. Then you have the maximum pensionable income, which will be reasonable, at least, or matched with DE2. And it was very wrong to divide pensioners into two categories. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmelo. Nikos, from your perspective, what's the one thing you would like to see happen for our pension system?
I would like to see the state, the government fulfilling its moral obligation of social justice for everyone. That's what I would like to see. So that means that no one falls under the poverty line, that the system is robust, and that the system is dependable. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Nikos. Abigail, last but not least.
Focusing on the target group that I represent, I think that what was mentioned in terms of mandatory opt-in and voluntary opt-out is something that is very interesting. And in fact, I believe some 2 or 3 budgets ago, we had suggested this when it comes to self-employed, since they have been identified and confirmed even by us that they are in a more of a vulnerable situation. So to the PermSec, if the government had to come out with something like this, we would gladly support it from our end. Apart from that, I think that there is very good quality work that has been done, and pensions have come a very long way. Now we need to continue this work and make sure that what is available and what is there for the picking, people are aware of it, and they know what are the advantages, and we try to drive the message home now.
Thank you. Finally, Mark, your concluding thoughts after all this that has been discussed. Where do we go from here? What would you see as being the priorities from your perspective?
Well, actually, I have scribbled down a lot of notes about what has been said by my fellow panelists, and I thank them for their thoughts. I would have liked to have more time to address some of them, but in any case, the importance of providing a safety net for the pension system to provide a safety net. Obviously, we all agree, but it is important to understand what a safety net is. Safety net does not necessarily mean that it provides for someone to live a decent life through his pension. It does not mean that even social assistance provide a safety net, but we all know that one cannot live on social assistance alone. So we need to be clear about what the objectives of our pension system should be. And in that respect, as a group, we feel that rather than looking at the way poverty is measured, because even in that respect, Carmelo, rightly so, mentioned that there are 25,000 pensioners at risk of poverty. But that is what is called relative poverty. I can also say that in these last 6 years, there were 3,000 pensioners less who are feeling materially deprived or severely materially deprived. So it depends how one look at those figures. But that is why, as a group, we feel that we should link the level of the minimum pension to some reference budgets, because that is actually what is most important. What does a person 65 plus need to live? Like the Caritas report, for instance, which does that type of measurements and thresholds. And we are proposing something like that. One final point about gender pay gap. Actually, Rini might be surprised, but unfortunately, the figures currently being provided about Malta, about the situation in Malta, about gender pay gap, pension pay gap, I'm referring to, are misleading because they are taking into consideration a once yearly bonus, which we have introduced in 2015, for persons who would not have contributed enough contributions to earn a pension. And these persons who, as expected, are practically all women, are receiving a yearly bonus of between 250 and 350 euros, depending on the number of contributions they would have paid. These are being added together with the rest of the women who are pensioners and earning a pension. So I can say that because of this 1 yearly bonus, whereas in 2014, we had 26.8% gender pension gap. This increased to 2017 to 43.7%. Why? Because in 2015, and therefore in 2016, there was an increase of 10%. We had introduced this bonus. In 2019, it went down to 39.5%. Leaving aside this 1 yearly bonus, from 26.8% in 2014, it will increase to 32.6%, and then down again to 28.8% in 2019. So maybe the measures we're taking are leaving the desired effect and the desired result. It does not mean that we've done everything. Obviously, there's a lot more to do, and the points which were raised by Rini and Abigail and the rest are very pertinent, and we need to address them. But I wanted to state this because, unfortunately, we are being, how do I say, unjustly being penalized for giving something back actually to those persons, especially women, who, although did not contribute enough for the pension, at least we are giving them something back.
Thank you, Mark. And with that, I would like to bring this webinar to a close. I would like to thank all the panelists for their very valid contributions and their different perspectives to this very complex issue. And I would like to invite you again for our next webinar, which will be held towards the end of March. Thank you very much. We will be answering some of the questions that were asked by the participants prior to registration. later on, and as well as any of the comments that require an answer from during this webinar. Thank you all. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, David, Nikos, Rini, Abigail, and Carmelo.
Thank you.
It was wonderful having you. Look forward to future such webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you.